The blood on Eleanor Jean's apron had long since dried brown, but she barely noticed as she pushed through the saloon doors into the dusty street of Leadville, Colorado, her hands still trembling from holding down another miner while Doc Patterson extracted a bullet from his shoulder. It was April of 1878, and Eleanor had been working as Doc Patterson's assistant for 3 years now, ever since her father had died in a mining accident and left her with nothing but his debts and a 2-room cabin on the edge of town. She was 22 years old and had never once been courted the way other women in town whispered about in the general store. Men looked at her with appreciation, sure enough, her auburn hair and green eyes drawing attention wherever she went. But they never approached with flowers or poetry or sweet words. They saw a woman covered in blood and bandages, someone who had seen too much suffering to be soft, someone who worked alongside men in ways that made her somehow less feminine in their eyes. She walked toward the mercantile, needing supplies for the clinic, when she heard the commotion near the livery stable. A horse was rearing, nostrils flaring, and a tall man in a dusty brown hat was speaking to it in low, soothing tones that seemed to cut through all the chaos of the busy afternoon street. "Easy now, easy, girl," the man said, and Eleanor found herself stopping to watch as the massive chestnut mare gradually calmed under his steady presence. The man was broad-shouldered and lean, with sun-darkened skin and hands that moved with confident gentleness as he stroked the horse's neck. When he finally turned, Eleanor saw a face that was weathered but young, maybe 25 or 26, with eyes the color of winter sky and a jaw shadowed with several days of stubble. Their gazes met for just a moment before Eleanor remembered herself and continued walking, but something in that brief exchange made her heart beat differently than it had in years. His name was Xavier Quinn, and she learned it that very evening when he appeared at the clinic carrying a ranch hand who had broken his arm in a fall. While Doc Patterson set the bone, Xavier stood in the corner of the room, his hat in his hands, watching Eleanor work with an intensity that made her self-conscious. "You are very capable," he said after they had splinted the arm and sent the ranch hand home with laudanum for the pain. Eleanor looked up from washing her hands in the basin, surprised. "It is my job. That does not make you less capable." Xavier turned his hat in his hands, and she noticed for the first time how clean his fingernails were despite the dust of travel on his clothes. "My name is Xavier Quinn. I have just hired on as foreman at the Silver Creek Ranch west of town." "Eleanor Jean," she replied, drying her hands on a clean towel. "I assist Doc Patterson. I know." He smiled, and it transformed his serious face into something warm. "Everyone in town speaks of you. They say you have saved more lives than the doctor himself." She felt heat rise to her cheeks. "They exaggerate, perhaps." Xavier settled his hat back on his head. "Miss Jean, would you permit me to call on you tomorrow evening? I could bring supper from the hotel restaurant if you have not eaten." The offer was so unexpected that Eleanor simply stared at him. Men did not call on her. Men did not bring her supper. Men saw her as a colleague, a nurse, someone useful but not someone to court. She began, then stopped. "Mr. Quinn, I do not think that would be appropriate. You do not know me." "Which is precisely why I would like to call on you," he said gently, "to know you." Eleanor felt something twist in her chest, something that felt dangerously like hope. "I work late most evenings. I would not be good company." "Then I will bring supper late." Xavier's blue eyes held her steadily. If you wish me to come, she should say no. She should protect herself from the inevitable disappointment when he realized she was not the kind of woman men courted seriously. But something in his patient, earnest expression made her hesitate. "Tomorrow is Saturday," she said slowly. "I finish at 6 o'clock. Then I will be here at 6:30. Xavier tipped his hat to her. "Good evening, Miss Jean." After he left, Eleanor stood in the empty clinic and wondered what she had just agreed to. Doc Patterson emerged from his office, his spectacles perched on his nose. "That young man has good manners," the doctor observed. "He wants to bring me supper tomorrow," Eleanor said, still feeling dazed. Doc Patterson smiled, the expression crinkling the corners of his eyes. "Then you should let him. When was the last time someone did something kind for you, Eleanor, without expecting you to stitch them up in return?" She could not remember. The realization made her throat tight. Xavier arrived the next evening at exactly 6:30 with a basket that smelled of roasted chicken and fresh bread. Eleanor had changed from her work dress into something cleaner, though she had not allowed herself to do more than that. She did not want to seem like she was trying too hard. They sat on the bench outside the clinic as the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Xavier had brought real china plates and cloth napkins, as if this were a proper dinner rather than a meal on a wooden bench. "Tell me about yourself," Eleanor said, because she did not know how else to begin. Xavier cut a piece of chicken carefully before responding. "I grew up in Kansas on a farm. My parents died of cholera when I was 17, and I went west to find work. I have been a ranch hand, a trail driver, and a horse breaker. 3 months ago, the owner of Silver Creek Ranch offered me the foreman position, and I decided it was time to settle somewhere." "Why Leadville?" Eleanor asked. "The mountains," Xavier said simply. "I was tired of flat land. And the mining boom means there is good money to be made in cattle and horses. The ranch supplies beef to half the mining camps in the area." Eleanor ate slowly, savoring food she had not had to cook herself. "Do you like the work?" "I do." Xavier looked at her, and in the fading light his eyes seemed very blue. "I like working with horses especially. They are honest creatures. If you treat them well, they remember. If you treat them poorly, they remember that too. People are not so different," Eleanor said quietly. "No," Xavier agreed. "They are not." They talked until full dark about small things and large ones, about Eleanor's work at the clinic, and Xavier's hope to own his own ranch someday. When he finally stood to leave, he gathered the dishes back into the basket with the same careful attention he had shown to everything else. "May I call on you again?" he asked. Eleanor felt that dangerous hope stirring in her chest once more. "If you wish." "I do wish. Very much." Xavier hesitated, then added, "Miss Jean, I want to court you properly. I know that might seem strange, given that we have only just met, but I believe in being honest about my intentions. I am not looking for a casual acquaintance. I am looking for a wife someday when the right woman will have me. And I would very much like to see if you might be that woman." The words should have frightened Eleanor, but instead they settled something restless inside her. Here was honesty, clear and direct. No games, no pretense. "I have never been courted," she said, the admission costing her pride. "Men see what I do, the blood and the death and the suffering, and they do not think of me as someone to court. I do not know how to do this, Mr. Quinn." Xavier's expression softened. "Then we will learn together, and please call me Xavier." "Xavier," she repeated, and liked the way it felt in her mouth. "You may call me Eleanor." "Eleanor," he smiled. "I will see you tomorrow if you will permit it." She nodded, not trusting herself to speak, and watched him walk away into the darkness with his basket and his careful manners and his honest blue eyes. The next day was Sunday, and Eleanor attended church services as she always did. Xavier was there, sitting near the back, and when their eyes met across the wooden pews, he gave her a small nod that made her heart flutter in a way she had not felt since she was a girl. After the service, he approached her on the church steps. "Eleanor, would you walk with me?" They strolled through Leadville's streets, which were quieter on the Sabbath. And Xavier asked her about her childhood, about her father, about how she had come to work with Doc Patterson. Eleanor found herself talking more than she usually did, the words flowing easily in response to Xavier's genuine interest. "My father was a good man," she said as they paused near the creek that ran through the edge of town. "But he was a dreamer. He truly believed he would strike silver and make our fortune. Instead, he died in a cave-in and I was left with debts to half the town." "How did you pay them?" Xavier asked. "I worked. I cleaned houses, took in laundry, cooked meals for the boarding house." Doc Patterson noticed that I never flinched around blood or injury, and he offered to train me as his assistant. The pay was better, and I found I had a talent for it. Eleanor looked down at her hands, which were strong and capable but bore the scars of her profession. "But it changed how people saw me. I became someone useful, someone necessary, but not someone to court or marry." Xavier was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I think perhaps those men were fools." Eleanor looked up at him sharply. "You do not know me well enough to say that. I know that you are strong and capable and dedicated to helping others. I know that you speak honestly and do not play games. I know that you have survived hardship and come through it with your compassion intact." Xavier met her gaze steadily. "Those seem like fine qualities in a woman to me." "Those are not the qualities men usually want," Eleanor said, trying to keep the bitterness from her voice. "Then I am not like most men." Xavier smiled slightly. "Eleanor, I spent 5 years driving cattle from Texas to Kansas. I have seen men at their worst and their best. I know what matters and what does not. Pretty words and delicate manners matter far less than strength of character, and you have that in abundance." Eleanor felt tears prick at her eyes and blinked them back fiercely. "You are very kind." "I am honest," Xavier corrected gently. "There is a difference." Over the following weeks, Xavier proved his words with actions. He came to the clinic almost every evening, bringing food or flowers or simply his company. He never seemed bothered by the blood on Eleanor's apron or the exhaustion in her eyes after a difficult day. He would sit quietly while she finished her work, and then they would walk together through the town or sit on the bench outside the clinic and talk. He learned that she loved wild roses and brought her a bouquet of them from the mountains. He learned that she had a sweet tooth and arrived one evening with peppermint sticks from the mercantile. He learned that she worried about her patients long after they had healed and listened patiently to her concerns about the miner with the lung infection or the child with the broken leg. In return, Eleanor learned about Xavier. She learned that he could read and write, which was not common among ranch hands because his mother had been a schoolteacher. She learned that he sent money every month to his younger sister in Kansas, who was married to a farmer. She learned that he woke before dawn every day and often did not return to the ranch until after dark, but he still made time to see Eleanor every evening he could. "You must be exhausted," she said one night in early May, when he arrived with shadows under his eyes. "I am fine," Xavier assured her. "We are birthing foals right now and it keeps me busy, but I would rather be tired and spend time with you than rest and miss seeing you." Eleanor's heart did something complicated in her chest. "Xavier, you do not have to come every day. I understand that you have responsibilities." "I want to come," he said simply. "Eleanor, I meant what I said about courting you properly. That means making you a priority, not an afterthought." But despite his words and his consistency, Eleanor found herself holding back. She had been disappointed too many times before, by men who showed initial interest and then drifted away once they truly understood what her life was like. She kept waiting for Xavier to realize she was not what he wanted, that a woman who spent her days elbow-deep in blood and suffering was not the kind of wife a man dreamed of. In late May, An outbreak of fever swept through the mining camps east of Leadville. Doc Patterson and Eleanor worked around the clock, treating the sick and trying to prevent the disease from spreading further into town. Eleanor barely slept for 4 days, catching a few hours here and there in a chair at the clinic. Xavier appeared on the second day with blankets and food and a grim determination in his eyes. "What do you need?" he asked. "We need water," Eleanor said, her voice hoarse with fatigue. "Clean water for drinking and washing. The creek near the camps is contaminated. That is what started this." "I will bring water," Xavier said. "Anything else? More willow bark if the mercantile has any, and clean linens." Eleanor swayed slightly on her feet and Xavier caught her elbow. "When did you last sleep?" he demanded. "I do not remember." Eleanor tried to pull away, but Xavier held firm. "You cannot help anyone if you collapse from exhaustion," he said. "Promise me you will rest, even if only for an hour." "There are too many sick people," Eleanor protested, "and there will still be sick people in an hour. Promise me, Eleanor." She looked into his worried blue eyes and felt something in her chest crack open. "I promise." Xavier brought water every day for the next week, hauling barrels of it from the clean stream on Silver Creek Ranch property. He recruited other ranch hands to help, and together they supplied enough clean water to help contain the outbreak. On the 4th day, when Eleanor was bandaging a fevered child's blistered hands, she looked up to see Xavier carrying buckets of water into the makeshift ward they had set up in the church hall, his shirt soaked with sweat and his face lined with exhaustion. He did not have to be there. This was not his responsibility. But he came anyway, day after day, because Eleanor had needed help, and he had given it without question. When the fever finally broke and the last patient was on the road to recovery, Eleanor walked out of the church hall into the bright June sunlight and found Xavier waiting for her on the steps. "It is over," he asked. "It is over." Eleanor sat down heavily beside him, every muscle in her body aching. "We lost 3 people, but we saved 27. That is better than I feared." "You saved 27, Xavier corrected. "You and Doc Patterson. We could not have done it without clean water, without you." Eleanor looked at him, at this man who had spent a week hauling water and asking nothing in return. "Thank you, Xavier. You do not need to thank me," he said quietly. "I did what anyone would do." "No," Eleanor shook her head. "You did what a good man would do. There is a difference." Xavier reached over and took her hand, his calloused palm warm against hers. It was the first time he had touched her beyond a polite arm to steady her, and the contact sent warmth flooding through Eleanor's exhausted body. "Eleanor," he said, "I need to tell you something." Her heart clenched with sudden fear. Here it was, the moment when he would tell her this was not working, that he had realized she was not what he wanted after all. "I am falling in love with you," Xavier said instead, and the words hit Eleanor like a physical blow. "I know it has only been 6 weeks, and I know you might not feel the same way. But I needed you to know. Watching you work this past week, seeing your dedication and your compassion and your strength, I knew for certain. You are the woman I want to spend my life with." Eleanor stared at him, her mind reeling. "Xavier, I am covered in sweat and blood. I have not bathed in 4 days. I probably smell like a horse." He laughed, the sound warm and genuine. "You smell like hard work and dedication, and you are beautiful regardless." "I am not beautiful," Eleanor said automatically. "I am practical. You are beautiful to me." Xavier squeezed her hand gently. "But I am not asking you to say anything right now. I know you are exhausted. I just wanted you to know how I feel. I wanted you to know that my courtship is not a passing fancy. I am serious about you, Eleanor Jean." Eleanor felt tears well up in her eyes, and this time she did not try to stop them. "No one has ever been serious about me before." "Then they were all fools," Xavier said, echoing his words from weeks earlier. And I am glad they were, because it means I have a chance. Eleanor squeezed his hand back, unable to find words for the tumult of emotions inside her. Xavier seemed to understand, because he simply sat with her in comfortable silence as the sun climbed higher in the sky, their hands linked on the church steps. Over the following weeks, Xavier continued his careful courtship. He brought Eleanor small gifts, thoughtful things that showed he paid attention to her words, a book of poetry when she mentioned missing reading, a new apron when he noticed hers was worn thin, a jar of honey from a farm outside town when she said she liked it in her tea. But he also brought something more valuable, his time and his presence. He helped Doc Patterson repair the clinic's leaky roof. He chopped firewood for Eleanor's cabin without being asked. He sat with her on difficult days when she lost a patient and let her grieve without trying to fix it. In July, he invited Eleanor to visit Silver Creek Ranch. It was her first time seeing where he worked and lived, and she was struck by how well kept everything was. The barn was clean and organized, the fences were mended, the horses were sleek and healthy. Xavier's quarters were in a small cabin near the main house, and when he showed it to her, Eleanor was surprised by how tidy it was. Books lined a rough shelf on the wall and wildflowers stood in a jar on the table. "Did you pick those for my visit?" Eleanor asked, touching the delicate petals. "I pick fresh flowers every week," Xavier admitted. "My mother always kept flowers in the house. She said they were a reminder that there was beauty in the world, even during hard times. It is a habit I never lost." Eleanor looked around the small cabin, seeing the care Xavier took with his space, the way everything was clean and ordered despite his long hours of work. "You would make a good husband," she said without thinking, then blushed at her own boldness. Xavier's eyes warmed. "That is good to hear because I very much want to be one. Your husband specifically." "Xavier," Eleanor began, but he held up a hand. "I know you are not ready to say yes yet. I can see it in your eyes every time I say something like that. You are still waiting for me to realize you are not what I want." Xavier stepped closer, and Eleanor could smell the clean scent of soap and leather on him. "But Eleanor, I need you to understand something. I am not going to change my mind. I have been courting you for 3 months now, and every day I am more certain, not less. You are exactly what I want." "How can you be so sure?" Eleanor whispered. "You have not seen me at my worst. You have not seen me lose my temper or make mistakes or fall apart. I have seen you exhausted and grieving and covered in blood," Xavier said gently. "I have seen you work until you could barely stand and still treat every patient with kindness. I have seen you doubt yourself and push through anyway. Eleanor, I have seen enough to know who you are at your core. And I love what I see." Eleanor felt her carefully constructed walls beginning to crumble. "I am afraid," she admitted. "I am afraid to believe this is real. I know." Xavier reached up and cupped her cheek with one calloused hand. "I know, and I am not asking you to overcome that fear all at once. I am just asking you to let me keep proving myself. Let me keep showing you that I mean what I say." Eleanor leaned into his touch, letting herself feel the warmth and steadiness of him. "What if I break your heart? Then I will survive it," Xavier said simply. "But I do not think you will. I think you are just as afraid as I am, but for different reasons. You are afraid I will leave. I am afraid you will never let me stay." The honesty of his words pierced through Eleanor's defenses. She looked up into his blue eyes and saw nothing but sincerity and patience, and a love that terrified her with its steadiness. "I am not brave like you think I am," she whispered. "You are braver than you know," Xavier replied. "You just need to believe it." They stood there in the sunlight streaming through his cabin window, and Eleanor felt something shift inside her. Maybe Xavier was right. Maybe it was time to stop waiting for the other shoe to drop and start believing that someone could actually want her, blood-stained aprons and all. August brought scorching heat to the mountains, and with it came a new challenge. The wife of Silver Creek Ranch's owner went into early labor, and the baby was breech. Doc Patterson was in Denver visiting his daughter, and Eleanor was the only medical help available. Xavier rode into town at a gallop, his horse lathered with sweat. "Eleanor, we need you. Mrs. Thompson is in labor and something is wrong." Eleanor grabbed her medical bag and climbed up behind Xavier without hesitation. They raced back to the ranch, and Eleanor spent the next 6 hours working to turn the baby and deliver it safely. It was delicate, dangerous work, and Eleanor felt sweat pouring down her face as she concentrated. Xavier stayed in the room the entire time, despite Mr. Thompson's suggestion that he wait outside. He held Mrs. Thompson's hand when she needed someone to squeeze, brought fresh water when Eleanor asked for it, and kept his voice calm and steady even when Eleanor could see the fear in his eyes. When the baby finally emerged, wailing and healthy, Eleanor felt her knees go weak with relief. Mrs. Thompson was exhausted but alive, and the baby, a little girl, had all her fingers and toes. "You saved them both," Xavier said later, when they were outside in the cool evening air. Eleanor was washing blood from her hands in a basin, her own hands shaking now that the crisis had passed. "I did what I was trained to do. Eleanor." Xavier took the towel from her and dried her hands gently. "You saved them. Accept that. Be proud of it." She looked up at him, at this man who had stayed by her side through every difficult moment of the delivery, who had never flinched at the blood or the screaming or the raw reality of childbirth. Most men would have fled. Xavier had stayed. "Thank you for being there," she said quietly. "It helped having you present." "I will always be there," Xavier said. "Whenever you need me. That is what I am trying to show you, Eleanor. I am not going anywhere." Something in Eleanor's chest finally, truly cracked open. She had spent 3 months waiting for him to leave, waiting for him to realize she was not worth the effort. But he was still here, still steady, still proving with every action that he meant what he said. "Xavier," she said, her voice trembling, "I think I am falling in love with you too." His face transformed, and before Eleanor could say anything else, he was pulling her into his arms and kissing her. It was her first real kiss, and it was everything she had never let herself dream about. Xavier's mouth was warm and gentle, his arms strong around her, and Eleanor felt like she was finally safe enough to fall. When they pulled apart, both breathing hard, Xavier rested his forehead against hers. "Does this mean you will marry me?" Eleanor felt a laugh bubble up in her throat. "You have not even asked me properly yet." "You are right." Xavier stepped back and, to Eleanor's shock, dropped to one knee right there in the ranch yard. He pulled a small box from his pocket and opened it to reveal a simple gold band. "Eleanor Jean, you are the strongest, most capable, most beautiful woman I have ever known. You are compassionate and dedicated and honest, and I love you more than I thought it possible to love another person. Would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" Eleanor looked down at him, at this good man who had spent 4 months proving his love through patience and consistency and care. She thought about how he had courted her properly, the way she had always secretly dreamed of being courted. He had brought her flowers and food and his time. He had learned what mattered to her and shown her that she mattered to him. He had stayed through the blood and the exhaustion and the difficult moments, never wavering. "Yes," she said, and the word felt like freedom. "Yes, Xavier, I will marry you." He surged to his feet and kissed her again. And this time, Eleanor let herself kiss him back with all the feeling she had been holding inside for months. When they finally broke apart, both of them were grinning like fools. I was beginning to think you would never say yes, Xavier admitted, sliding the ring onto her finger. I was beginning to think no one would ever ask, Eleanor replied, or at least no one who meant it. I mean it. Xavier pulled her close again. I have meant it since the first week I met you. I just had to wait for you to believe me. Eleanor looked up at the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky and felt a peace settle over her that she had not experienced in years. She had been courted properly, treated with respect and care, and she had found a man who loved her not despite who she was, but because of it. They were married in September, in the same church where they had first talked after the fever outbreak. Eleanor wore a simple blue dress that Xavier said matched her eyes, and Xavier wore his best suit with a wildflower boutonniere that Eleanor had picked that morning. Doc Patterson gave Eleanor away, his eyes suspiciously bright, and half of Leadville turned out to witness the ceremony. You are the best thing that has ever happened to me, Xavier whispered as they exchanged vows, and Eleanor believed him because he had spent months proving it. Their first year of marriage was not without challenges. Eleanor continued to work with Doc Patterson because she loved her work and because the town needed her skills. Xavier supported her decision without question, even when it meant late nights and interrupted dinners and blood on her dresses. They lived in Eleanor's cabin at first, but Xavier immediately began making improvements. He built a second room so they had more space, repaired the roof properly, and installed a better stove so Eleanor could stay warmer in winter. He never made her feel like she needed to choose between her work and their marriage, and Eleanor loved him more every day for that understanding. In return, Eleanor made Xavier's favorite meals when she could, mended his clothes, and listened to his dreams of someday owning their own ranch. She rode out to Silver Creek Ranch when he was working late, bringing him dinner and keeping him company during foaling season or when the cattle needed tending. They learned each other's rhythms and habits, the way married couples do. Xavier learned that Eleanor liked her coffee black and strong, that she hummed while she worked, that she had nightmares sometimes about patients she could not save. Eleanor learned that Xavier was an early riser who liked to watch the sunrise, that he had a habit of talking to horses like they were people, that he worried about his sister in Kansas more than he admitted. In December, a harsh blizzard struck Leadville, trapping people in their homes for days. Eleanor and Doc Patterson worked constantly to treat cases of frostbite and hypothermia, as people struggled with the brutal cold. Xavier showed up at the clinic with blankets and firewood, helping to keep the building warm enough for patients to recover. You should be home, staying safe, Eleanor told him, even as she was grateful for his presence. My home is wherever you are, Xavier replied simply, and Eleanor felt her heart squeeze with love. When Christmas came, they celebrated quietly in their cabin with a small pine tree that Xavier had cut from the mountains. He gave Eleanor a new medical bag, finer than her old worn one, with compartments for all her tools. She gave him a book about horse breeding that she had special ordered from Denver, knowing he dreamed of raising quality horses someday. This is the happiest I have ever been, Eleanor said on Christmas night, curled against Xavier's side in their bed. I did not think it was possible to feel this content. Xavier kissed the top of her head. We are just getting started. Wait until we have our ranch and our children and our whole life ahead of us. You want children? Eleanor asked. They had not talked about it specifically, though she had assumed. I want everything with you, Xavier said. Children, a ranch, growing old together, all of it, but only if you want it too. Eleanor thought about a baby with Xavier's blue eyes and her auburn hair, about teaching a child to be kind and strong and capable. I want it, she said. I want all of it. In March of 1879, Eleanor discovered she was pregnant. she told Xavier over dinner, watching his face carefully for his reaction. He went very still for a moment, then broke into the widest smile she had ever seen. "Truly?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. "Truly?" Eleanor smiled. "I am about 2 months along. The baby should come in October." Xavier stood up and pulled her into his arms, holding her like she was made of glass. "We are going to have a baby. Eleanor, we are going to be parents. Are you happy?" Eleanor asked, even though she could see the answer in his face. Happy does not begin to cover it. Xavier pulled back to look at her, his eyes shining. "You have given me everything I never knew I needed. A home, a wife I love, and now a child. I am the luckiest man alive." Eleanor's pregnancy progressed smoothly, though she continued working with Doc Patterson until she was 7 months along, and the doctor finally ordered her to rest. Xavier was attentive without being overbearing, making sure she ate properly and got enough sleep, but never treating her like she was fragile. In June, Mr. Thompson approached Xavier with an offer. He was getting older and wanted to spend more time with his growing family, and he trusted Xavier to manage the ranch. But more than that, he was willing to sell Xavier a portion of Silver Creek land at a good price, allowing Xavier to start his own operation while still working for the main ranch. Xavier came home that evening with stars in his eyes. "It is happening, Eleanor. We can have our own ranch. Not right away, but within a few years we will have enough saved, especially with this land deal. We can build a house, raise horses, have the life we have been talking about." Eleanor saw the joy in his face and felt it reflected in her own heart. "Then let us do it. Let us build something together." They began planning immediately, sketching out ideas for where their house would go, what kind of horses they would raise, how they would manage both Xavier's foreman duties and their own growing operation. It was exciting and terrifying, and everything Eleanor had never let herself dream about before Xavier had shown her it was possible. Their son was born on a crisp October morning in 1879, after a labor that was mercifully short. Doc Patterson attended Eleanor himself, with Xavier holding her hand through every contraction. When the baby finally emerged, wailing and red-faced and perfect, Xavier had tears streaming down his face. "He is beautiful," Xavier whispered, holding his son for the first time with the same careful gentleness he showed to everything he loved. "He looks like you. He has your eyes," Eleanor said, seeing the blue beginning to show through the newborn haze. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names for months but never settled on one. Now, looking at their son, Xavier said, "What about James? After your father," Eleanor felt tears well up. "You would do that. Your father gave me you," Xavier said simply. "That deserves to be honored." They named him James Quinn, and he was the light of their lives. Xavier proved to be as devoted a father as he was a husband, changing diapers without complaint and walking the floor with James during fussy nights so Eleanor could rest. He built a cradle with his own hands, carving it with careful attention to every detail. Eleanor had worried that becoming a mother might make her miss her work at the clinic, but she found she loved caring for her son. She still helped Doc Patterson when there were emergencies, bringing James along in a basket when he was tiny, but mostly she focused on her family and their plans for the future. In the spring of 1880, they broke ground on their new house. It would be modest at first, just 4 rooms, but it was theirs. Xavier and his ranch hands worked on it in their spare time, and Eleanor helped when she could, holding boards and passing tools while James napped nearby in his basket. The house was finished by late summer, and moving in felt like a dream. Eleanor stood in the main room with James on her hip, looking at the furniture Xavier had built and the windows that let in mountain light, and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. "We did it," she said to Xavier. "We actually built a home. "We built a life," Xavier corrected, wrapping his arms around both of them, "and it is going to be a beautiful one." He was right. Over the next 5 years, their ranch grew steadily. Xavier's reputation for training quality horses spread, and people came from all over Colorado to buy his stock. Eleanor managed the household and helped with the bookkeeping, her organizational skills from the clinic translating perfectly to running a ranch. In 1882, their daughter was born, a tiny thing with Eleanor's green eyes and Xavier's steady temperament. They named her Rose, after the wild roses Xavier had brought Eleanor during their courtship. James, now 2.5, was fascinated by his little sister and insisted on helping with everything. In 1884, they had another son, Samuel, who had Eleanor's auburn hair and Xavier's adventurous spirit. Their house felt full and loud and perfect, with children's laughter echoing through the rooms Xavier had built with his own hands. Doc Patterson retired in 1885, and Eleanor took over much of his practice, working from their ranch and making house calls when needed. Xavier built her a dedicated room for medical supplies, with good light and clean surfaces, and patients began coming to them for treatment. Eleanor found she could balance her calling with her family, and Xavier made sure she never had to choose between them. Through it all, Xavier continued to court Eleanor. He still brought her wildflowers, still made time for them to sit together on their porch in the evenings, still told her she was beautiful even when she was covered in mud from helping with a difficult birth or blood from stitching up a ranch hand. He made her feel treasured every single day, and Eleanor loved him with a depth that still sometimes took her breath away. One evening in the fall of 1886, 8 years after they had first met, Eleanor and Xavier sat on their porch watching the sunset. James was 7 now, practicing his roping skills in the yard. Rose was 4, carefully arranging wildflowers in a jar. Samuel was 2, toddling around and getting into everything. Their ranch was prosperous, their children were healthy, and Eleanor could not imagine a more perfect life. "Do you remember when you first asked to court me?" Eleanor said, leaning against Xavier's shoulder. "I was so certain you would change your mind." "I remember thinking I had never met anyone like you," Xavier replied, his arm around her waist. "And I was right." "There is no one else like you, Eleanor. You are extraordinary." "You spent months proving that you meant it," Eleanor said softly. "Months of patient courtship showing me that I was worth the effort. No one had ever done that before." "Then they were all fools," Xavier said, as he had said so many times over the years, "because you are worth everything." Eleanor turned to look at her husband, at this man who had courted her properly and loved her completely and built a beautiful life with her. "I said yes in the end, did I not?" "You did." Xavier smiled, the expression still as warm as it had been 8 years ago, "and I have been grateful every day since." James called out that he had successfully roped a fence post, and Rose spilled her flowers, and Samuel toddled over demanding to be picked up. Eleanor and Xavier moved to tend to their children, but Xavier caught her hand first. "I love you," he said, as he said every day. "More than I did yesterday, less than I will tomorrow." Eleanor squeezed his hand, feeling the calluses that came from hard work and the warmth that came from devotion. "I love you too. Thank you for not giving up on me, even when I was too afraid to believe." "I would wait forever for you," Xavier said simply, "but I am glad I did not have to." They gathered their children and went inside as the sun set over the mountains, painting the Colorado sky in shades of gold and crimson. Eleanor Jean Quinn looked around at her family, her home, the life she had built with a cowboy who had courted her properly and loved her completely, and knew she had everything she had never dared to dream of. Their story was not one of instant passion or dramatic gestures. It was a story of patience and consistency, of a man who had seen a woman others overlooked and decided she was worth the effort. It was a story of walls coming down slowly, of trust being earned day by day, of love being proven through actions rather than words alone. Xavier had spent months courting Eleanor, showing up every single day with flowers and food and his steady presence. He had waited for her fear to subside, had proven his devotion through the fever outbreak, and the difficult births and the everyday challenges of life in the Wild West. He had asked her properly, on his knee with a ring and a promise, and when she had finally said yes, it was with the certainty that came from truly knowing someone. They grew old together on their ranch, watching their children grow and have families of their own. James became a ranch foreman like his father, known for his skill with horses and his steady leadership. Rose married a doctor and carried on her mother's medical legacy, running a clinic in Denver. Samuel became an explorer, traveling the West and sending back letters full of adventure, but always returning home to the ranch that his parents had built. Eleanor and Xavier stayed devoted to each other through all the years, through the joys and the sorrows, the triumphs and the challenges. Xavier never stopped bringing Eleanor wildflowers, even when his hands were gnarled with arthritis. Eleanor never stopped looking at Xavier like he was the best man she had ever known, because he was. When they were old and gray, sitting on the same porch they had built together so many years before, Xavier took Eleanor's hand and said, "I would do it all again. Every moment of courtship, every patient day of waiting for you to say yes. You were worth all of it and more." Eleanor squeezed his hand, feeling the familiar calluses and warmth. "I am grateful I finally believed you, that I finally let myself be loved the way I deserved to be loved." "You always deserved it," Xavier said. "I just had to convince you of that." They sat together as the sun set over the mountains. Two people who had found each other in a rough mining town in the Colorado mountains, who had built a life through patience and devotion and steadfast love. Eleanor Jean had never been courted properly before Xavier Quinn, but he had spent months doing it right, proving his love day by day until she finally believed him enough to say yes. And in saying yes, she had found everything she had never known she was missing: a partner who treasured her, a family who loved her, and a home that was built on the foundation of a courtship done right. Their love story was not the loudest or the most dramatic, but it was real and true and lasting. It was the story of a cowboy who had seen a woman covered in blood and dust and had thought she was beautiful. It was the story of a woman who had been overlooked and undervalued finally finding someone who saw her true worth. And it was the story of a courtship that had been patient and proper and perfect, leading to a marriage that lasted a lifetime and a love that never dimmed. When Xavier Quinn died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78, surrounded by his children and grandchildren, Eleanor held his hand one last time and whispered, "Thank you for courting me properly. Thank you for loving me completely. Thank you for giving me this beautiful life." And when Eleanor Jean Quinn followed him 3 years later, also surrounded by family in the house Xavier had built for her, her last words were about the cowboy who had spent months proving his love, who had waited patiently for her to say yes, who had given her everything she had never dared to dream of. Their story lived on in their children and grandchildren, passed down through generations as an example of what love looked like when it was done right. Patient, consistent, devoted, and true. The ranch they had built together still stood, managed by their descendants, and in the main house hung a portrait of Eleanor and Xavier from their wedding day. She wore her simple blue dress, and he wore his suit with the wildflower boutonniere, and both of them were smiling like they held the secrets of the universe in their joined hands. Visitors would look at that portrait and see two people clearly, deeply in love. And the family would tell the story of how Xavier had courted Eleanor properly, spending months proving his devotion until she finally believed she was worth loving, until she finally said yes. It was a love story worthy of the Wild West, not because of gunfights or adventures, but because it was real and hard-won and beautiful. It was the story of two people who had found each other against the odds and built a life together through dedication and patience and unwavering commitment. And it was a story that proved that true love was not about grand gestures or instant passion, but about showing up every single day and proving through actions that love was not just a feeling but a choice, made over and over again, until it became as natural as breathing. Eleanor Jean Quinn and Xavier Quinn had lived that kind of love, and their legacy was not just in the ranch they had built or the children they had raised, but in the example they had set for what it meant to love someone completely, to court them properly, and to build a life together that was worth every patient moment of waiting, every careful gesture of devotion, every day of choosing each other above all else. Their story ended the way all good love stories should, with two lives well lived, a family well loved, and a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. And it had all begun with a cowboy who had seen a woman others overlooked, who had decided she was worth courting properly, and who had spent months proving it until she finally, wonderfully, joyfully said yes.